The sirens were the first thing anyone heard. Sharp, stuttering bursts that fractured the quiet evening air of Willow Creek's sleepy Main Street. The fading sun painted long amber streaks across the cracked pavement as a small crowd gathered on the sidewalk, their murmurs mixing with the static of police radios. In the center of it all stood a little girl, barefoot, no older than 8, her hair tangled, cheeks streaked with dried tears. She clutched a threadbare stuffed bear to her chest as if it were armor. Her knees trembled, but she stood her ground on the edge of the curb, eyes wide and wet as 2 uniformed officers loomed over her. She swung at me. One of them barked into his shoulder mic, voice taut with adrenaline. "She's just a kid, Miller," the other muttered, glancing uneasily at the watching crowd. She resisted. Miller snapped, jaw rigid. Protocol. The words were cold. Procedural, meant for paperwork, not children. The girl took a hesitant step, backward. The bear slipped from her arms and hit the asphalt with a soft thud. Then Miller drew his taser. "No," gasped someone in the crowd. The crack came like lightning. Twin barbs shot out with a hiss of compressed air, wires snaking through space faster than thought. The little girl convulsed. Her scream tore through the street like shattered glass. She crumpled to the pavement, tiny limbs jerking as blue arcs danced over her small frame. Gasps, shouts, phones shot into the air like a forest of accusing eyes. "Are you out of your mind?" someone shouted, but Miller was already holstering his weapon. Breath shallow, eyes darting, as though even he couldn't quite believe what he'd done. The other officer knelt beside the child, stammering, "Call Em's call. She's not breathing right." And then the crowd parted. No sirens heralded him. No shouted commands announced his arrival. Just a slow, measured rhythm of footsteps on the pavement. Polished black shoes, pressed blue trousers with a razor crease, a white-gloved hand lowering dark sunglasses as he stepped out of the orange haze of the dying sun. The chaos seemed to shrink around him. Even Miller stopped speaking. His mouth hung open. Someone near the back whispered, voice trembling like a flag in the wind, "That's her father." The man stopped beside the fallen bear, picked it up gently, and looked at his daughter. Then his gaze rose, steady and unblinking, and locked on the officers. He did not speak. He did not blink. He simply stood like a statue that had decided to breathe. They didn't know, the narrator murmured, the stillest man in America was about to move. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as the man sat motionless beside his daughter's bed, his white gloves folded in his lap. The child's small chest rose and fell beneath a thin blanket, every breath fragile as spun glass. A cartoon bandage wrapped around her arm where the taser barbs had pierced skin. The heart monitor beeped in slow, steady rhythm, the only sound in the room. He hadn't said a word since they brought her in, not to the nurses, not to the police sergeant who had tried to apologize, stammering about miscommunication, not to the press camped outside, flashing cameras like carrion birds. He simply sat, silent, unmoving, just like at the tomb, years earlier. Long before this town had ever heard his name, Staff Sergeant Nathan Cole had stood on the battlefield halfway across the world and watched his best friend die. It had been a remote Afghan village, 110 degrees in the shade, dust swirling like smoke. They were escorting civilians out when the roadside bomb tore their convoy apart. Nathan had survived only because his friend, Ramirez, had shoved him down just as the fireball bloomed. By the time Nathan clawed back to his feet, Ramirez was gone. The guilt consumed him. For months, Nathan drowned in silence. The army doctors called it PTSD, he called it penance. He stopped sleeping, he stopped laughing, he stopped living. Until he saw them, the tomb guards. He'd wandered the cemetery grounds, one grey morning, after his discharge papers came through, his duffel bag slung across his shoulder like dead weight. And then he saw them, immaculate uniforms, rifles, gleaming, each step measured to the fraction of an inch. No twitch, no hesitation, no break in the rhythm. Perfect stillness in a world gone mad. And in that stillness, he saw a way to honor Ramirez. Nathan clawed his way through the grueling selection, 14-hour shifts, flawless drill routines, memorizing the names of every fallen soldier in Section 60. He learned to march like clockwork, to stand like stone, to speak only when ceremony required it. Over time, the nightmares faded. The guilt never left, but he carried it differently, silently, precisely. He became a tomb guard. His daughter, Lily, was the only one who ever saw the cracks. She had been just for when her mother passed from a sudden illness, leaving Nathan to raise her alone. While he trained in darkness and silence, she filled their small home with finger paintings and laughter. She was sunshine where he was marble, and she adored him every night. She would wait for him to return from Arlington, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her stuffed bear clutched tight. He'd walk in, boots clicking like a metronome, and she'd leap into his arms. Stillness is strength, he would tell her softly as he tucked her into bed. Daddy, she'd whisper back, touching his nose. But sometimes, you can smile. He never argued with that. The hospital door creaked open now, and a young man stepped inside, wide-eyed, fidgeting, a rookie cop still wearing his uniform. Officer Miller, he hovered by the doorway like a child caught in a lie. I didn't know she was yours, he blurted, voice brittle. They said she was resisting. I followed protocol. Nathan didn't look at him. Miller swallowed hard, words spilling faster. The chief said to say it was justified, that she lunged, but she didn't, did she? She just cried. His voice cracked on the last word. Nathan rose slowly from his chair. The motion precise, controlled. He placed Lily's bear gently beside her pillow, then walked past Miller without a word. The officer flinched as if a shadow had passed through him. Out in the corridor, the walls vibrated faintly with the rumble of distant voices, the growing crowd outside. The town had split overnight, lines drawn in chalk and fury. Half defended the police, chanting about order and obedience. The other half raged with outrage, carrying homemade signs demanding justice for the girl. On social media, the video had already gone viral. 10 million views and counting. The frame-by-frame showed Lily standing still, sobbing, doing nothing, right up until the moment Miller fired. The footage replayed endlessly with captions like "Monster," and "How could this happen?" And then someone recognized the silent man lifting her from the pavement. They posted a photo of him in full ceremonial dress, guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington. Within hours, veterans from across the country began driving toward Willow Creek. Meanwhile, the chief basked in the attention. Chief Randall Price stood in front of the police station that morning, flanked by news cameras, his belly pressing against his uniform. A broad smirk split his face as he spun the story into something noble. Our officer acted according to procedure, he boomed. Children or not, we do not tolerate defiance. This so-called guard, he sneered the word like an insult, thinks standing still makes him better than law enforcement. But this town doesn't need statues. It needs action. The crowd applauded. Some jeered. Reporters scribbled furiously. Randall loved it. He loved control, loved the feeling of owning the room. What he didn't see, just beyond the crowd, was Nathan standing perfectly still across the street. Watching him, no sign, no banner, just silence, and eyes like cold steel. That night, Nathan sat at his kitchen table, cleaning the scuffed brass of his ceremonial badge with a white cloth. Lily's latest drawings sat beside him, stick figures holding hands under a giant yellow sun. In the corner, she had written in wobbly letters, "Daddy is brave." He stared at it a long time, then he folded it with perfect creases and slipped it inside his hatband. Tomorrow, he would face them, not for revenge, not for pride, for stillness, for her. The courthouse plaza was never meant to hold this many people. By noon, the entire square had become a boiling sea of humanity. Reporters elbowing for camera angles, protesters hoisting signs, veterans in faded uniforms standing shoulder to shoulder like a silent wall. The air buzzed with outrage and anticipation. Helicopter blades thumped somewhere far overhead, and at the center of it all, Nathan Cole stood, immaculate, unmoving, ceremonial blues, pressed, razor-sharp white gloves, luminous in the glare of the noon sun. His black shoes reflected the chaos swirling around him like dark mirrors. His chin was level, his gaze fixed on the courthouse doors. A single white rose was pinned to his breast pocket. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the shouts, didn't even blink. He simply stood. The reporters hated it. "Sergeant Cole," one of them shouted, pushing forward with a mic, "do you condone violence against law enforcement?" Another, "What message are you sending by standing here?" A third, "Do you think the officer should be fired?" Nathan gave them nothing. His silence infuriated them more than any words could have. Inside the courthouse, Chief Randall Price grinned at his reflection in a brass plaque. The hearing wasn't even about him. Technically, it was an internal review for Officer Miller, but he had made sure it became about him. He had called in favors, lined the hallway with officers in pressed uniforms, and invited every local network to broadcast his speech. "Let them chant," he muttered to himself, smoothing his tie. "Let them scream. He won't break me." Randall loved spectacles. He thrived on noise. What he didn't understand was how to fight someone who used none. Back outside, the crowd began to split in two currents. On the courthouse steps, A group of pro-police supporters had gathered with bullhorns and flags. Their chants came in harsh bursts. Respect the badge. Law and order. No more chaos. Across from them, veterans stood in a silent row, older men and women. Shoulders squared despite their years. Medals glinting. They held no signs. They simply watched Nathan and nodded. Between them, families hovered anxiously, children clinging to their parents' legs. The air trembled like a wire pulled too tight. Miller slipped out the courthouse side door, pale and jittery. He spotted Nathan instantly. Everyone did. The man was impossible to miss, a still point in a spinning world. Why are you doing this? Miller muttered, voice trembling as he approached. You'll make it worse. Nathan said nothing. His eyes didn't move, didn't even flicker. Miller's hands curled into fists. They're gonna crucify me in there, and you're just standing there like a man. Someone said behind him. Miller turned. A veteran in a faded marine jacket stared at him with flint in his eyes. Like a man holding the line. Something you wouldn't understand, Miller faltered. Then stormed off, shoulders hunched. By mid. Tension had begun to crackle like static. Chief Randall finally emerged, flanked by uniformed officers. His grin widened at the sight of the cameras. But it faltered when he saw Nathan standing alone at the base of the steps, blocking the path. Randall stopped. So did everyone else. You need to move, Randall called down, voice booming for the microphones. This is public property, not a stage. Nathan didn't respond. You think this little statue act makes you untouchable? Randall sneered. You're not at your tomb now, Sergeant. Out here, you follow our rules, nothing. The silence hit harder than any retort. Randall's smirk cracked. You want to stand there like some hero? Fine. Let me tell you something about heroes. He started down the steps, slow and deliberate, letting each word drip with disdain. I've seen what happens to men like you. Broken toys trying to make the world neat again. But the world's not neat. It's ugly, chaotic, and standing still won't change that. It just makes you a target. He stopped one step above Nathan, looming over him. Say something, he hissed. Anything. Nathan blinked once, and said nothing. The crowd stirred uneasily. Phones rose into the air again, recording. Even the officers on the steps shifted, unsure. Randall's jaw flexed. You don't scare me. That was when the children came forward. It started with one, a boy no older than Lily, clutching a crayon, drawing. He slipped through the crowd, stood beside Nathan, and placed the drawing at his feet. It showed a soldier holding a little girl's hand. Then another child came, and another. Soon a small ring of children surrounded him, silent as the guard himself, laying flowers, toys, scraps of colored paper. The chaos of the plaza dimmed under the soft shuffle of their shoes. Even the veterans' eyes glistened. Randall's face darkened. This is manipulation, he barked. Parading kids for pity, no, said the Marine veteran from before, voice low but carrying. They came on their own. The plaza quieted. The helicopters droned overhead like distant thunder. Nathan finally moved, just his hand reaching down to pick up one of the drawings. He held it carefully, like a fragile relic, then tucked it under his arm with the same precision he used for the rifle at the tomb. The crowd exhaled as one. Randall's control began to slip. He strode back up the steps and spun toward the cameras, trying to wrestle the narrative back. This circus ends now, he barked. Officer Miller acted within procedure, and that is the end of it. I will not let some grief-soaked statue dictate the laws of this town. The words echoed off the courthouse facade, but they rang hollow, too loud, too desperate, and Nathan simply turned, slowly, mechanically. He faced the crowd, his white gloves catching the sunlight. Then he raised his hand, not a fist, not a point, just a single finger pressed gently to his lips. Silence. The chants died mid. The shouting froze in throats. Even the bullhorns cut off like wires had been severed for a full 10 seconds. The entire plaza went completely still. 1,000 people, and not a sound. Randall's mouth opened, then closed. Sweat glistened on his temple. Nathan lowered his hand, then faced the courthouse again, returning to his perfect stance. Reporters whispered furiously, unsure what they'd just witnessed. Did he make them stop? Was that planned? No, he just did it. The moment hit the networks like wildfire. Clips of the silent gesture exploded across every platform. Veterans called it discipline. Activists called it defiance. Children called it bravery. Randall called it insolence. Inside, he slammed his office door and hurled a glass across the room. It shattered against the wall. He's mocking me, he snarled. Mocking this department? Miller hovered in the doorway. Maybe. He's just standing. Standing is defiance, Randall barked. And tomorrow, I'll crush it. That night, Nathan walked Lily through their quiet home, her small hand curled around his finger. She had been released from the hospital that morning, still pale, still jumpy at sudden noises, but her eyes were bright again. "Why did they hurt me, Daddy?" she whispered as he tucked her into bed. He knelt, brushing her hair back gently. "Because they were afraid of me, of stillness," he said softly. "They don't understand it yet." She frowned. "Will they?" "Yes," he murmured, standing, his silhouette framed in the soft nightlight glow. Tomorrow. She hugged her bear tight. "Be careful." Nathan paused in the doorway, shoulders square, voice steady. "Always." Outside, under the cold stars, his phone buzzed. A single message from an old comrade. "We're coming." The next day, they would arrive, the brothers and sisters he once stood shoulder to shoulder with, their boots thundering like war drums on courthouse stone. And in their path stood one man, Randall Price, still believing noise could defeat silence. He was about to learn otherwise. The sun rose behind the courthouse like a blade of molten steel. By dawn, the plaza was already full. The veterans had returned, dozens more this time, in wheelchairs, on canes, in pressed uniforms with medals catching fire in the morning light. They lined the steps like silent sentinels. Reporters jostled for angles, helicopters thrummed low, and at the center of it all, Nathan Cole stood. Perfect posture, gloves immaculate, face carved from stone. At exactly 0700, he shifted a single, precise quarter turn toward the courthouse doors, his heels clicking once on the granite. The sound cracked like a gunshot. In the quiet morning, the plaza went dead silent. Inside the courthouse, Chief Randall Price adjusted his collar and stared at the mirror. He looked tired. The night had not been kind. Sleep had slipped through his fingers, replaced by anger that gnawed at him like acid. Every news channel, every social feed, every talk show had run the footage of the tomb guard silencing an entire plaza with a single gesture. "National hero stands against police brutality." One headline read, "Stillness stronger than force," said another, the one that made Randall's jaw clench. "A statue has more honor than our chief." He had smashed his phone now. As he straightened his tie, his hands shook with the rage he was trying to disguise as control. "They want a spectacle," he whispered to his reflection. "Fine, I'll give them one." By 0900, the veterans had unfurled a massive American flag across the courthouse steps. Its stripes rippled like blood and bone. Children clustered near its edge, holding lilies. Nathan remained at the base of the steps, alone and unmoving, white gloves luminous in the sun. A soft breeze stirred the rose on his chest. Then the courthouse door slammed open. Randall strode out, flanked by two officers in full-dress blues. The man had transformed overnight, his suit flawless, his hair slicked back, his grin sharp enough to cut glass. A wireless mic curled around his ears. Cameras tracked him like prey, scenting blood. "Good morning, citizens," he boomed, voice echoing from hidden speakers. "It's a beautiful day to defend the law." The crowd jeered. Some cheered, most just waited, breath held tight. Randall descended the steps like a conquering general. He stopped 3 feet from Nathan and spread his arms for the cameras. "This man," he said, jabbing a finger at Nathan, "believes standing still absolves him of the law. He thinks silence makes him a saint." He began to circle Nathan like a shark, but silence is just cowardice dressed in ceremony. Nathan did not flinch. Randall's voice hardened. "You are not guarding the tomb today, Sergeant Cole. You are obstructing justice. And if you do not move, you will be removed." Still nothing. Randall's eyes narrowed to slits. He stepped closer. "Say something, anything." The crowd leaned forward like a single creature. Nathan blinked, slow, deliberate, and said nothing. Randall snapped. "Fine," he hissed. "Then I'll speak in the only language you understand." He lunged out. The move was sudden, violent, his hand striking Nathan's shoulder with a sharp crack. Gasps tore through the plaza. Cameras flashed like lightning. Randall shoved again, harder this time, spittle flying from his lips. "You think you're untouchable," he roared. "You think your little pose means anything out here?" Nathan's body rocked slightly with the impact, then locked again, still as granite. The veterans surged forward, voices rising like distant thunder. Children screamed. The officers flanking Randall hesitated, unsure if they were witnessing an arrest or an assault. Randall's face twisted with fury. He drew back a fist. And then Nathan moved. It was not a punch, not a block, not violence. It was precision. Nathan's gloved hand flashed up, catching Randall's wrist in midair with mechanical grace. The motion was so clean it seemed choreographed. Then, without a word, Nathan stepped forward a single measured pace and rotated Randall's arm down in a flawless control hold. The chief's knees buckled. His mic clattered to the stone. That had happened in less than 2 seconds. Randall gasped in shock, suddenly kneeling, arm pinned, unable to move. Nathan's face remained calm, unblinking, cold as marble. The entire plaza froze. Even the birds went silent. Then Nathan spoke his first words in 2 days. "You struck a child," he said, voice quiet but carrying like thunder. "This is mercy." Gasps ripped through the crowd. Veterans straightened. Children stared wide, dash-eyed. Nathan released Randall's arm and stepped back to his original position, heels together, hands clasped over the rose on his chest. Randall crumpled to the ground, clutching his wrist. Humiliation radiated off him like heat. And then the world erupted. Reporters screamed questions. Veterans roared approval. Officers rushed forward, but stopped short, uncertain. Their chief had attacked first. Their chief had been disarmed without a single drop of blood. Randall staggered upright, face purple. "You're under arrest," he bellowed, spittle flecking his lips. "You assaulted a law enforcement officer." "No," a voice said. A lone Marine veteran stepped forward from the crowd, medals clinking softly. His voice was steel. "You assaulted a father." Another voice rose, then another. Within seconds, the veteran's wall of silence became a rolling tide of voices. "He's right." He showed restraint. He showed what discipline looks like. The children began to chant softly, words they didn't fully understand but somehow felt. "Stand strong. Stand strong. Stand strong." The chant grew louder, carried by hundreds, then thousands. "Stand strong. Stand strong." Randall spun in a circle, trapped in the sound, wild-eyed. "This is a mob," he shrieked. "You're all complicit." Nathan didn't move. It didn't even blink. His stillness made Randall's frenzy look monstrous. The officers finally stepped forward, but not toward Nathan. They surrounded Randall. "Sir, you need to step inside," one said quietly. "This is out of control." "I am in control," Randall shouted, but his voice cracked like breaking glass. "No, sir," another officer said. "You lost it the moment you touched him. The cameras caught everything." Randall's face twisted in disbelief as his own men gently escorted him back up the courthouse steps, his feet dragging, his words dissolving into incoherent rage. The chant thundered behind him. "Stand strong. Stand strong. Stand strong." When the doors slammed shut, Nathan was alone again at the base of the steps, motionless, gloves white against a dark rose on his chest. The plaza slowly quieted. Reporters whispered. Veterans saluted. Children watched with glowing eyes. Nathan turned his head slightly, the smallest movement, and met Lily's gaze at the edge of the crowd. She smiled, a small, trembling smile, and mouthed one word, "Hero." Nathan gave her nothing back. But inside, under the iron discipline, something fragile stirred that night. News channels replayed the footage on an endless loop, slow-motion shots of the hold, Randall's stunned face, Nathan's 7-word sentence echoing across every network. "You struck a child. This is mercy." Commentators called it the most disciplined act of defiance in modern history. Military analysts broke down the maneuver frame by frame like a sacred ritual. Parents whispered that maybe stillness could be stronger than fury. And deep inside Fort Myer, in the silent barracks of the old guard, a group of tomb sentinels watched the footage on a single phone in the dark. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. At the end, one simply whispered, "Tomorrow we march." The world thought the confrontation was over, but the climax had only just begun. The world seemed to be holding its breath. The plaza had gone silent, so silent that the faint flutter of the American flag above the courthouse sounded like a drumbeat. The crowd ringed around the marble steps, frozen mid-motion, phones suspended, mouths parted, eyes wide. Officer Miller's smirk had evaporated. His jaw trembled as if fighting gravity. His outstretched finger, which moments ago jabbed at the tomb guard's chest, now hung limp at his side. The guard stood exactly as before, heels aligned, shoulders squared, eyes locked forward. But there was a difference now, subtle yet seismic. It was in the silence, an ancient, crushing silence, the kind that filled cathedrals and battlefields, a silence that said, "Enough." Then like glass shattering in reverse motion exploded. "Drop it, now," barked a voice. Dozens of tactical boots pounded across the plaza as internal affairs officers surged from the courthouse doors. Their black vests gleamed under the noon sun, radios crackling. Officers stepped back. "Step back now." Miller and Hargrove spun, blinking, as half a dozen men and women in body armor formed a semicircle around them, weapons drawn but angled down. The sight hit like thunderclaps through the crowd. Audible gasps, murmurs, frantic whispers. Miller sputtered, "We were handling you," tased a child. A sergeant cut him off, voice sharp as broken steel. "And then you assaulted an active duty sentinel of the tomb." The words detonated. Even the reporters flinched. The tomb guard still had not spoken. But as the IA sergeant turned to him, helmet tucked under his arm, he did something that made the crowd's heart stop. He broke stance. Slow, deliberate. The white-gloved hand at his side rose, and unpinned the glinting silver badge from his breast. He held it out, palm flat, toward the sergeant, not surrendering, but offering, like a knight returning a sword only because the war was already won. The sergeant's face flickered. He took the badge with a bow of his head. Then he pivoted on his heel. "Officers Miller and Hargrove," he declared, voice booming across the marble plaza, "you are under arrest for excessive force, misconduct, and child endangerment. You will be relieved of duty immediately." The world erupted, shouts, cheers, sobs. The air split with them. Phones caught every second as Miller's wrists were yanked behind his back and steel cuffs clicked tight. Hargrove offered no resistance. His lips trembled like wet paper as he was led away. Miller fought to turn his head, eyes burning holes at the guard. "You think you won," he hissed, spittle clinging to his lips. But the guard didn't even glance at him. He simply shifted his gaze. Dan, the little girl, stood a few feet away, her small hand clutching the hem of her dress. She had woken sometime during the chaos. The paramedics, kneeling beside her, had stepped aside quietly as if realizing this moment wasn't theirs to touch. The guard walked to Hersalant, measured, precise. The crowd parted instinctively, as though the marble itself was making way for him. He knelt, his white gloves brushed away the dust on her cheek. Her eyes blinked up at him, still glassy from tears, but now reflecting something steadier. Recognition. "Daddy," she whispered, and the unmovable man broke just enough. His jaw tightened. His lips trembled. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her gently into his chest, and for the first time all day, he closed his eyes. Cameras snapped like crackling fire. Reporters whispered into microphones, voices shaking with adrenaline. The tomb guard embraced his daughter. The guard rose, lifting her with effortless strength. Her tiny hands clasped around his neck. The stuffed bear dangled from her fist like a captured flag. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned back toward the plaza. A corridor of uniformed officers now lined the marble steps. But they weren't standing at ease anymore. They were saluting, one by one, like falling dominoes. Every hat lifted, every spine straightened, every palm-struck brow. Even the IA sergeant stood at attention. A ripple of discipline swept through the chaos like wind through tall grass. The tomb guard met their gaze, silent. He gave a single, sharp nod. Then, with his daughter in his arms, he resumed his post. He walked back to the exact crack in the pavement where he had first stood, planted his heels together, straightened his shoulders, and went still as if the world around him no longer existed, like a monument that just happened to be alive. The cameras caught it. The child clutching his neck, the marble plaza drenched in sunlight, chaos at his feet and eternity in his posture. Within hours, the footage would race through every screen on Earth. But for now, there was only silence, clean, absolute, sacred. And in that silence, everyone understood. Discipline had defeated chaos. The plaza emptied slowly, like the tide retreating from a battered shore. Reporters whispered into dead microphones, their voices hushed now. The riot of sound that had once surrounded the marble courthouse had faded to a fragile hush broken only by the hum of distant traffic, and the faint crackle of radios being turned off. Yellow tape fluttered limply around the steps, where, only an hour ago, the world had come apart, and at the center of that hollow stillness, he remained. The tomb guard stood at his post. His daughter had fallen asleep on his shoulder, her tiny breaths feathering against his collar. The stuffed bear hung from her hand, gently swinging with each rise and fall of her chest. He hadn't moved in 20 minutes, except to shift her weight slightly so subtly it looked like a trick of the wind. Time blurred around him. The chaos was gone, but he was still there, as if the earth itself had rooted him to this single crack in the pavement. A slow, deliberate sound broke the quiet. The measured approach of polished boots on stone. Colonel Avery. His medals winked in the fading light as he stepped across the plaza. The onlookers, just a few paramedics, a scattering of silent locals, stood straighter instinctively as he passed. He walked alone, hat tucked under his arm, expression unreadable. He stopped 3 feet from the guard. Neither man spoke. They simply stood in that silence, two statues carved from different wars. Then the colonel came to attention, and he saluted. Not the quick, perfunctory snap used at press events. This was the old kind, the kind done at gravesides and flag-draped coffins. Slow, reverent, precise. His arm rose like the lifting of a nation's breath, his fingers slicing the fading light. That it was not a salute for rank. It was a salute for sacrifice. The guard didn't break posture, but his eyes softened barely, like frost easing under dawn. He inclined his head a single degree, and the colonel let his arm drop. The gesture was complete. Colonel Avery spoke, finally, voice like gravel wrapped in silk. You stood when most men would have fallen, and you protected what mattered, without ever drawing your weapon. He paused, gaze shifting to the sleeping girl. She'll never forget this day. Neither will anyone else. The guard said nothing, but in the glint of his eyes there was a flicker like the last ember of a dying campfire. Refusing to go out, the colonel took one step back, heels clicking. When she wakes, he said, quieter now. Tell her the colonel called her father a hero. Then he turned and walked away, the echo of his boots fading into the distance until the plaza was silent again. The guard let the moment breathe. Just once, he looked down at the dog tag that dangled beneath his collar. It was dented, scratched, a battlefield relic. His thumb brushed across the name of the friend he had buried years ago. The man who'd saved him, who had believed in him when no one else had. I kept the line, he murmured, barely audible, barely real. The little girl stirred at his voice. Her eyes cracked open, hazy and drowsy. She blinked at him, then at the marble steps, the last golden light spilling across them. Daddy, she whispered, lips curling in a faint smile. You're my hero. For a heartbeat, the disciplined mask faltered. His jaw tightened, his breath hitched, and then, just as quickly, the marble returned to his bones. The guard shifted his stance. He planted his heels, straightened his spine, and stood watch eternal and unmoving as the sun bled down behind the courthouse and the world turned quietly toward night. The footage went everywhere. Within hours, the moment was etched across every screen on Earth. The little girl curled against her father's shoulder, the rows of saluting officers, the lone tomb guard standing motionless as the sun slid down behind him. It was replayed on evening news, dissected on talk shows, looped endlessly on social media until even those who hadn't seen it felt as if they had. People argued about the politics. They debated the procedures, but they all agreed on one thing. Something unshakable had stood its ground that day in a world that applauds noise. Here was a man who won without raising his voice. In a time that rewards outrage, he had shown restraint and in doing so, revealed its strength. They had called him cold. They had called him mechanical. But when the storm came, when chaos howled and children cried, he did not bend. He simply stood, and the world bent around him instead. Some said it was just duty. Others called it honor. But to the little girl who whispered hero into his ear, it was far simpler. It was her dad. And maybe that's what the world saw in him, too, not a soldier or a symbol, but the truth hidden beneath the marble, that the quiet ones are often carrying the heaviest weight, and they carry it not for applause, but because someone must. So, if you ever see a tomb guard standing silent in the heat, or rain, or cold, unmoving as the world rushes by, don't mistake that stillness for weakness, that it is strength, older than the noise of our age. It is tradition, unbroken and unbreakable. It is the calm that stands between us and the storm. Tradition is not weakness. Stillness is strength. If this story moved you, share it. Tell someone. Let them remember the day a silent man stood tall and reminded the world what honor still looks like.